Hello, Garland Nixon here. Let's talk about where we are now in the context of U.S. foreign policy um, historically and moving forward, and why it was that it was inevitable that we would get here. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. I just saw somebody put in the chat AM or PM. I'm an ADD guy, okay? If you're lucky, I get everything right. So maybe 50% of the time I get everything right. The other 50% of the time, I may have that I'm on coming on Christmas evening and it may be, yesterday. So whatever the case may be, we'll play the hand that we're dealt, and here we are. What's important? There was an old cigarette advertisement that said, "What do you want? Good grammar or good taste?" Right? At any rate, so let's move forward. I think what I'm getting at here is, the whole thing that this was inevitable. If you look at the history of U.S. foreign policy, right? Let's go back a little bit, just kind of briefly. So what we were told during the Cold War was that Russia was evil and they were an enemy. And the reason that they were an evil enemy is because of communism. It was an ideological struggle. And China, they were red China. It was an ideological struggle. It was the United States. I mean, they're going to, the domino theory. Well, my God, if communism goes to this country, it'll go to that country and on. And then communism will dominate the world. It'll be a threat to us because we want freedom, not communism, blah, blah, blah. So we were told that the United States was involved in this international struggle against the forces of communism because our job was to protect freedom worldwide. Communism would take freedom worldwide. And so therefore we had a number of enemies, adversaries because of communism, right? Okay, the Cold War goes aside. And now, for some reason, we seem to have the same exact enemies. But the foundational reasons why we're struggling with the same exact enemies have changed. So now, before, the problem with Russia was it was communist and they're terrible, right? But now Russia's not a communist country anymore. But it seems to me that the intensity of the U.S. blob, the U.S. foreign policy's angst and ire regarding Russia have increased rather than decreased. Now let's move on to China. Well, red China's evil because they're communist, right? But they were viewed as a somewhat not really a threat. As actually, if we're honest with it, China was viewed by the U.S. Capitol as an opportunity, right? So what happens? The U.S. decides we're going to have a rapprochement with China under Nixon. Don't believe for one second that Nixon did that by himself, that he was the only person, that he woke up and said, I'm going to do that. And there was, the whole foreign policy blob was pushing against him. No, what you saw with Nixon's rapprochement with China was factions of the ruling elite fighting it out. There were those in the ruling elite that said, no, 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 we can never have a rapprochement with China. And there were those, as we will see later, as we saw later, who said, holy crap, do you see how much cheap labor we have? Oh, for God's sake, we could close down all of our factories where we're paying these damn Americans a living wage. We just move them over. Basically, they could go back to a time in the US. And this was this whole plan. If you think about it, they could go backwards. They were in the United States, right? And in the US, what do you have? You had child labor, you had no weekends off, you had, you name it. You had all of this labor that you could pay cheap. The idea was cheap labor, right? It was like they had slavery, which is the cheapest labor. And then that kind of, fell through. So then they could go to like the factory, these huge factories in the US where they just took advantage, the fact that the company store, et cetera, right? So they could take advantage of workers here. And now those stinking workers put together unions and organized labor, and they asked for stuff. They wanted weekends off and an 8-hour day and things like that so they could have some level of humanity. Now, this is a problem. And the titans of industry, the powerful, wealthy people thought, how can we need to go back to a time when we didn't have to pay these, a fair labor wages. So what happened? What do you know? There's China with all those poor people. It was a very, very poor country, right? So they're like this. Well, we know the Chinese are inferior to us intellectually, so we don't have to worry about them ever becoming a technological or an economic threat because we're far superior to the likes of these poor little Chinese people. All they want to do is, watch karate movies when in the unlikely event that they actually have electricity. So we got them. So they get the faction of the ruling elite that wants rapprochement with China, get their way, and boom, the Chinese labor market opens up. And when it does, there's a flood. They all take their job factories and their jobs and all of that, and they move them to this area where there's cheap labor. Hooray! Now, of course, there's a price to pay, but that price was paid by the American people and the American worker. So they're like more than happy, right? Of course, the contradiction was always awaiting them in that if your worker is your customer and you screw your worker, you inevitably screw your customer, which explains why a lot of people wanted to move towards the global South as their new customer base, right? And if you think about the cycle, inevitably, they would destroy the West workers. They would move the base, their customer base, to the global South. They would sell stuff in the global South. Of course, inevitably, the cycle continues. The people in the global South and China will want more money, and the people in the West will be impoverished. So you move industry back to the impoverished West, and we start the cycle all over again. So that was their filthy little plan, right? Okay, and I do believe that the factions in the ruling elite who didn't like Nixon doing rapprochement with China were the ones that took him out. And if you look at the Nixon presidency and how it ended and how the whole scandal went down, it was pretty clear that CIA operatives were involved. It was pretty clear that Nixon was taken out. I'm not saying he's a good guy or a bad guy. This is not a political discussion about Nixon, but clearly they took Nixon out. The factions of the ruling elite that didn't like Nixon setting China up now to do business with the US were unhappy, but it didn't matter what they did. The industrial faction got their cheap labor. Boom, they move everything over, right? So now things are looking good. The Soviet Union falls around 1991. Things are looking even better. They're looking at now, here's what they're looking at. Numero uno. China gives you your cheap labor. Asia gives you your cheap labor. Hooray. Russia, which they always eyed Russia for two reasons. First and foremost is it's a huge area and it's loaded with natural resources. And they wanted, just think about the two things they were going to put together. A, cheap labor in China. B, cheap natural resources from Russia. Sure, there's natural resources in Africa, but those darn Africans are always fighting for their freedom and stuff like that, which is a pain in the ass. So then you got to genocide them. Okay. And they look at Russia as it's a vast place. There ain't that many people, so they can kind of realistically, they can genocide the Russian people, put them in their place. And this huge open area where there's nobody, you just take the natural resources, and what do you know? You've got cheap labor in China. You got free natural resources that you've pilfered from the Russians. What's not to like? Life is good. Now you dominate the world, and anybody that gets in the way, you genocide them, and you just lie to the American people. And you say to the American people, look, American people, here's the way it is. Your lives are going to be a living hell, but we'll give you a universal basic income or something like that. That was always the plan. wipe out the American people, then economically, and then they were going to be nothing but stooges. A universal basic income, which I used to say was a great idea until I realized something. The universal basic income was a plan by the ruling elite for this reason. They understood that when they moved everything over to, they moved their base of industrial operations out of the US, they're going to have a restive population who's suffering. So what they need to do is two things. Number one, they need to get you accustomed to a significantly lower standard of living. So you start a universal basic income. Well, you don't have a job, but we'll give you some money, right? It's going to be free. No problem. We're going to give you money. We're going to put it in your account every 2 weeks, right? Now, so what happens? They give them just enough that they can survive, but they don't have to work for it. So there's a certain amount of people that are like, oh man, I can't believe this. I can, I can't make it. I need more money. And they say, we'll give you universal basic income. And so now they give you just enough to survive. So you're like, well, at least I can make it. So they give you enough to survive. Keep in mind something. You can't own a house really because you don't make enough, and they increase the price of housing. So you so BlackRock owns the house that you live in, the building that you live in. The government gives you a universal basic income, which a significant portion of that you then give to your landlord, which is BlackRock. You then pay off your bills, which is Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, etc. So in reality, the universal basic income means this. I give you, I'm just going to use a number, $1,000 a month, supposedly. That $1,000 a month hits your account. I'm just using a number. 700 of it goes to BlackRock. Another 100 of it goes to for your rent. Another 100 of it goes to Citibank for this. Another 100 of it goes. So the bottom line is, ostensibly, I'm giving you a universal basic income. But what I'm really doing is giving you money that when it hits your bank account, it's going to speed up. It's going to hit a greased skid and it's going to speed up. I'm using you with the universal basic income to funnel money right back to my same donors, right back to the ruling elite. BlackRock gets it, this person. And in the end, you got a couple of pennies that you can make it and you can survive. But you got a roof over your head. You got just enough to eat, just enough to survive. And you know what I say to you? I say, well, you have a universal basic income. Now you can pursue other things. Wouldn't you like to do art? Wouldn't you like to? Now you don't have to work, and you can maybe get a job somewhere making a few pennies, just enough for extra money. So the universal basic income provides enough for you to pay your basic bills. Now you can go out and get that crappy job that you were complaining about. And that gives you just enough for a few extra pennies, right? And you're allowed to go outside of your home in your city for 15 or 20 minutes a day, and everybody's happy except you, right? So that's the game plan. There were always been some holes in that game plan, but add this to it. 2000, 2001, the neocon Paul Wolfowitz writes the infamous Wolfowitz Doctrine, in which he says, look, no country in the world is allowed to rise to a point where they can challenge our hegemony anywhere in the world, not even locally, not even regionally, nothing. We are the unquestioned dominating power in the world, and nobody can be allowed to, which of course implies we will use force, that we will kill you if you try. It was mafia. This is our side of the street. At one point, the mafia families broke up, I think, New York into 7 areas, and each of the 7 mafia families got to control a part. And if you wanted to do anything or come into that area, you had to come through that mafia family, get permission, give them their part. They call it street tax, right? You want to do crime in this area, you want to run something in this area, you want to run a brothel, a strip joint, whatever. Well, the Bonanno family controls that area. You got to talk to the Bonanno family and get protection from them, which means you got to give them, let's say, 50% of the profit. And then, of course, that means nobody will screw with you. Nobody will rob you, break into you. There'll be no crime. There'll be nothing because you're protected by the Bonanno family, right? Okay. So their plan is they're going to run the world. Let's go there. So then, unfortunately for them, things go awry, right? Number one, the plan to dominate China turns into the Chinese people are pretty smart. They're hardworking. They're industrious. They are a communist country, but they are, since they are industrious, they say, look, here's what we need to do. We've got a system, an economic system But what we need to do with that economic system is adjust it so that it works best for us. So they tweak their economic system. About 70% of it is state owned, about 30% of it is privately owned. They allow private investment from out of the countries, outside of the country, so that they can do various things they couldn't do before. They also then get involved in private in investing their money all around the world so they can build up the global south and other countries. And there's a great market for them and there's natural resources for them. So they're using their noggins. They're not hardcore ideologues. They're like, look, we're socialist country, but we'll continue to tweak as necessary to make these things work economically. And it works out quite well for them. So now their economy is going strong and the US is like, holy crap. This ain't working for us. And we see China rising, and that's a problem. They start talking about a Thucydides trap. All it means is we can't control everything. Okay. Meanwhile, what happens with Russia? Vladimir Putin comes to power. He's a somewhat, and I'm not using this in a negative way, he's a Russian nationalist. In other words, he believes in Russia. He loves his country. He stands for his country, and he believes he wants his country strong, and he has a lot of success. And Russia starts building stuff. But one of the things that the Russians know historically is that once they start building strong, these bastards next door, the Europeans and the Americans and the neocons, want their stuff. They know there's gold in them thar hills, and they know the neocons want to steal it. So as the Russians, as they start to build economically, as they start to make themselves resilient to U.S. imperial sanctions and etc. As they do that, simultaneously, they're building their military. Now they've got a tremendous advantage because the Soviet Union had great science, made incredible industrial and scientific advances. So Russia has that scientific legacy of the Soviet Union. And what do? They start building out their military industrial capability and their military capability in general. And so Russia is prepping themselves, saying, look, historically, every time we start to rise, you come try to punch us in the face. So we know that as we build scientifically, as we build industrially and economically, we have to build militarily. We got to be able to protect it because you sons of bitches are a bunch of heathens and you're always trying to steal our shit. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt, right? And that's what they know about the neocons. I'm not talking about the European people or the American people. The European and the American people are, in fact, victims of the ruling elite in the same way that the Russians and the Africans are. Now, we can see it more and more. They're turning their sights. Hey, we can't steal stuff like we used to from Africa, and we can't prey on the South Americans like we used to. What do? Well, we can do student loans. BlackRock can buy up all the houses. We can raise the prices of everything on the American people and screw them. The same monsters that we completely deregulated these countries and we sent them around the world to use violence and criminality and lawfare to steal from other countries. We created these monsters. And now that they can't steal from other countries like they used to, they're coming back here. That's right. That's how Frankenstein monsters work. You create a Frankenstein monster, it sometimes is going to pick you up and heave you out the window when the villagers come with their torches. And now the global South is saying, hey, we're sick of this bull crap. We want some independence and freedom. And the U.S. empire is like, well, we don't like that. But hey, here's the American people. What do you know? Perhaps we can prey on these bastards. And that's what they're doing. They're preying on us. Now, here's my point. Here's where I'm going with this thing. Therefore, the rise, the inevitable historical rise of various world powers was always going to present the quandary that the neocons find themselves in. And that was in order to dominate the world, at some point, if you're an empire, you see the rise of other world powers and they must be suppressed. It's extremely expensive to maintain an empire and dominate the world. And what inevitably happens is this. You have an empire, right? And think of an empire as an octopus. You got an octopus. Here's the body of the octopus sit here and tentacles going out in all different directions. And they grab food out here and they drag it into the mouth and it eats it, right? There's something over there. What do you know? Something I want. Tentacle grabs it, brings it in, and it eats it, right? The center of the empire is, let's say, the U.S., mainland. They reach out to Africa to grab natural resources. They bring them in here. Reach out to, so that's reaching out, right? And inevitably, what happens to your body if you start to starve? If you can't reach, that's what our body does. We reach out, we grab an apple, we bring it into the mouth, we eat it. This is the empire. Our tentacles reach out, grab things, and we eat it, right? What happens if your body reaches out for an apple, a pear, a banana, a walnut, whatever it is you want to eat, right? It's something to drink. Your body reaches out for that and it's not there and you can't get anything. What does your body do? Technically, it starts eating itself, right? Your body will start feeding on whatever nutrients it has to keep itself alive, to burn energy. That's why you get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier when you're starving, because your body starts reaching inward for nutrients. It's just trying to survive, right? That's what the empire is doing. The empire now is reaching out. And the Africans, like in the Sahel region, like, get the hell out of here. We ain't giving you we're not giving you our uranium anymore. We're not giving you this anymore. We're not giving you that anymore. As it gets harder for them to feed externally, they start feeding internally. So what do? Goldman Sachs, what do we have to do? Well, what do we have here we can eat? Well, we got students. Great. Give them all loans. What else do we have? Oh, we got American people. What a good. Let's figure out how to put the American people in debt up to their ears. Why? Because we need debt. We got an economy that runs off of debt, right? And what is debt? What is debt? Always remember the definition of debt. It is a claim on future earnings, which means that once you start living off of debt and once you start putting your people in debt, there comes a point where their future earnings, you have claims on their future earnings so far out in the future that it becomes they become unable to survive. If I owe you everything I make for the next 100 years, and I ain't going to live another 100 years, both of us have a problem. I got a problem because I can't live today. I'm living 100 years from now. And you got a problem because you're lending money that ain't never getting paid back. Right? So it was inevitable, in that their plans for Russia and China, oddly enough, would only empower Russia and China. Everything that they did, your plan to utilize Chinese labor inevitably means that China is going to grow to be a great economic power. Your plan to, let's say 2014, to put a bunch of sanctions on Russia in 2014 now means that Russia recognizes the threat and Russia is going to move to be able to live and survive and thrive in a world where they're heavily sanctioned by the US empire. And that means they're going to learn to be, for lack of a better term, more autarkical, where they can survive internally without needing help from the outside. But the other thing is this: in going after Russia, in going after China, and you're already going after all these other global South countries, there's something else that was inevitable that was built here. And that was an whatever you want to call it, anti-imperialist bloc, anti-US bloc, whatever you want to call it. But you created a bunch of people that had to huddle together to survive. So now Russia and China, their powers are trying to rise, but they're not rising, but they're not trying to rise. There's a difference between rising and trying to rise. You're not trying to rise. A bird doesn't try to fly. It is the nature of birds to fly. Flying is what makes it a bird instead of a fish. Not that some birds can't fish, but you know what I mean? The sun's not trying to shine. Shining is the nature of what makes it a sun. If it wasn't shining, it would be the moon. You know what I'm saying? So as Russia and China inevitably rise because they're human beings and they want to live better and they want to survive and they're a country and they want their country. They're proud of their history and their culture and all of these things, right? So rather than trying to rise, they're inevitably going to rise. So the US says their need to dominate, need to control, narcissistical need to be in charge of everything meant that inevitably their actions to take these other countries out, to push them down, is going to send a clear message. What they didn't realize is when you're trying to take China out, when you're trying to take all of these Russia, et cetera, out, and you're trying to stop other countries from rising, you are sending a clear message to the world. And the world is, I'll attack anybody. What do you think India is looking at it now? Why India is starting to buck up and say, "Ugh, we're backing away from the US empire," because India now knows they aspire to be a world power. And they even know how you're going to do it. Holy crap, we got the Kashmir region and the Kashmir region here in Pakistan, and we got our issues. Holy shit. The United States is going to take the Kashmir region and like arm it and say, oh, they need freedom and democracy in Kashmir. Why? Because that's an area that's screwing with you. That's an area where you got problems. So India can simply look at the model and say, we know you're coming after us, and we know how you're coming after for us, and we know it's going to be loaded with all kinds of sanctions and all. So a bunch of these countries have no choice, no alternative if they want to survive in the future and have any level of independence and sovereignty. They got to start coming together and building an alternative infrastructure where they can eat. And I mean that, in the purest sense. I mean, literally, they can eat because they know the U.S. will starve them to death. So in taking all these actions, I mean, when you do something, taking all these actions that send messages, when you do something, it seems that sends messages to other people. Everything we do is a way of communicating. If you get mad, let's say some guy starts dating a girl and he's dating her and she does something that he doesn't like, and on day one, and he yells at her. He's sending her a message, isn't he? He's sending a lot of messages to himself, how he reacts to stress, how he feels about her, how he views relationships. All of these things are sending him a message. He yells at her, yeah, you get on my damn nerves. She now has learned some things about him. Do I want a guy? She has to ask herself, who, when things don't go his way and when he gets pissed, he's unable to address them in an adult, in an intellectual manner. Instead, he acts out in a childish rage and screams at the top of his lungs, right? He's communicating to her who he is and how he reacts to stress, how he reacts to not getting what he wants, right? When the US has done all these sanctions and all this other crap, they are communicating a message to the world. This is how we intend to maintain supremacy and hegemony, through violence and anger, through sanctions. So now at this point, everybody says, hey, we got to prep ourselves to be able to do this, to deal with this. Therefore, BRICS. Therefore, the rise of an alternative economic structure and alternative military structures are inevitably rising too, knowing that the U.S. uses violence. So we've got alternative economic and military structures rising in the world to protect themselves, let's face it, from the U.S. empire's dastardly and diabolical scheme to rule the world. So all along, as the U.S. empire sent all these messages out to everyone, people had to, get ready for what was a potential move on them by the U.S. neocons. So the U.S. neocons, all of their actions, not just set up the inevitable clash that we were in, but in a counterproductive way, they sent the messages to everyone, you better prepare for this inevitable clash. And so people prepared. Look at over and over. How long's China been getting ready? You're sending a message to China, we want to attack you. China is building, you best believe that they're very quietly building a massive military infrastructure. Meanwhile, you don't think Iran has been planning and setting up a plan for when they are inevitably attacked by U.S. imperialism through their proxy in occupied Palestine? Of course, all of these people are. They're hoping it doesn't happen, but they're saying, hoping, as the old saying, hope in one hand. You got hope in one hand and sand in the other, and see which one gets you the furthest, right? But the bottom line is, so even more rapidly now, countries are seeing the decline of the U.S. empire, and the desperation of the U.S. empire, the internal instability of the U.S. empire, and they're saying these are madmen. They are who we thought we are. They're getting to this point of total desperation. What are they going to do? Now, internally, Americans don't get something. This is very related to all of this. So Americans have been talking about the deficit, right? Oh my God, we got a $38 billion deficit. We're going to crash. Inevitably, we're going to crash. This is unsustainable. Yeah, that's true. But the neocons had a different plan for that, right? Here's what you say to yourself. Oh, they've got to be stupid. How can they keep spending? We've got to cut back. We've got to stop spending. We've got to address this. They got a plan to address it. They have a clear plan to address it. And If you're not an evil bastard and you would like to see humanity survive, you'd say, hey, it's a pretty good plan. Here's their plan. And they're telling you their plan. They're letting you know all the time their plan. People are like, they owe all of this money to China. What are they going to do? They got a plan. I had a case one time in law enforcement where this guy owed some money to a drug dealer, right? And so he invited the drug dealer over to his house. He banged him in the head with something. He killed him. He threw his body in a truck and he took it out in the bay, and he dumped his body out in the bay. Right? He had a plan. He owed the guy money. His plan was not to pay the guy. Well, there's an old saying, another old saying, way back when in the Bay, and you probably heard of these kind of things. They called it Shanghaiing someone. And what they do is they snatch somebody out of a bar. They throw them on these big old schooners or skiffs or whatever that would make them go out and work on the bay for months and months. Now, people were kidnapping victims, and ultimately they called them paying them off with the boom. What that meant was when it came time to pay the person, you bring the boat about, the boom, and you have them stand on the side. The boom comes around, the sail comes around, the boom comes around, bow, hits them, knocks them overboard. And they all die, into the icy waters of the bay. You're paying them off with the boom. You're going to kill them instead of paying them, right? That's the plan. Here's my point. That's the plan for the U.S. neocons. Hey, we owe everybody money that we can't afford. Our economy is crashing. We owe a fortune to China. China's what are we going to do? Easily with China and the world. We'll pay them off with the boom. Here's the plan right now. War with China. Why? The U.S. I read this article the other day. The U.S. is planning on blockading China, setting it up so they can blockade China. Well, wait a minute. Let's think about this for a second. Europe's number one trading partner for the most part is China. Africa, Latin America, everybody around the world, their number one trading partner is China. So if the United States cuts off Chinese ships and economy to the world in their argument that they're going after China, technically and theoretically they're going after China. Sure, you can make that argument. But since China is everyone's number one trading partner, it's a war on the world. They're saying to the rest of the world, what's happening? These African countries are all like, hey, we need all of this stuff from China. Can't have it. But we eat some of that stuff and it helps us survive, and then we'll have food. Yeah, we know that. And you ain't getting food and you ain't getting the stuff. What about Latin America? You ain't getting it. What about Europe? Oh, new. You ain't getting it either. You'll be treated the same in the same way that internally right now they're impoverishing and they're putting all of the people in Europe and America in debt to prep them for what's going to get even far worse. Their plan, we got a $38 billion debt. And if this world economy stays together, we owe that damn money. Well, we got to destroy the world economy. What's the easiest way to destroy the world economy, to completely wipe it out, right? The Great Reset. You go to war with China. Well, they'll probably lose. They don't give a crap. The main thing they want to do is, how can they lose? If their plan is to drag China into a war and then to destroy the world economy, because everybody needs to do business with China. And what happens? All these corporations around the world, you can't buy anything, you can't get anything, you can't get parts, electronics. And guess what else happens? Taiwan, chips. Boo, sorry about that. Nobody can get chips. They're going to blow up the Taiwan chip factory. They're definitely going to do this. Watch this. Let me show you something. Let me show you. Okay, they don't want us to see that. Why don't they want us to see that? Hold on, give me a second. I'm having trouble because they're really what they're saying, if I can ever get what they're saying I can't find it. We'll try it. Well, so here's what we're going to do. We'll try it this way. You can only see it for a second. Watch this. U.S. would destroy Taiwan's semiconductor, and see, they keep trying to get you to stop. But basically, it says U.S. would destroy Taiwan's semiconductor factory rather than let China have it, right? So what does that mean? And now we've got, here's another one. Threatening to destroy TSMC is unnecessary and counterproductive, the Council of Foreign Relations. In recent years, some have advocated the United States should plan to destroy Taiwan's semiconductor fabrication facilities, both to deter a Chinese assault and to ensure that China does not inherit Taiwan's semiconductor industry. So here's what I'm saying. They're literally saying we'll blow up TSMC. So part of the plan is get China to invade Taiwan. Now, you know, they want that so they can get a war with China, and they immediately blow up TSMC and get rid of the semiconductor. Remember, one of the things that the U.S. worked on doing was moving TSMC, right? Building a big plant in Arizona and moving TSMC to Arizona, right? And then what happens? Then you blow it up. But keep in mind something. This is the reset. You drag war into China. You get these poor dumbass Ukraine Part 2 suicidal bastards in Taiwan to say, yeah, we're in. Let's go fight China, right? Okay, China isn't saying it's going to blow up TSMC. The U.S. is saying it. Yeah, we're on your side. We'll give you lots of weapons. Oh, thanks a lot. How are you going to protect us from China? Well, for starters, we're going to blow up the TSMC, the actual economic engine of your island. Yeah, we'll blow that to hell. But be not concerned, because we've already rebuilt it in Arizona, right? So part of the reset is there's nothing the U.S. can do to deal with the fact that TSMC owns the Taiwan, the semiconductor chip industry worldwide, and China is on their tail, and you know China's going to be right there behind them soon. China will be equal, if not above it, right? You know that's coming within the next 5 to 10 years. So you drag China into a war, and so you try to cripple China and put them back 25 years, and you blow the hell out of Taiwan. That's done right off the bat. I mean, they're literally saying, no, China's probably not going to blow up TSMC, but we are, right? You're going to destroy Taiwan, and you blow up all of their industry to stop China from getting its hands on it, right? So great friends you got there, Taiwan. Great friends. Hey, what are you going to do? I'm Garland's friend. What are you going to do if somebody attacks Garland? I'll kill Garland myself just to make sure that they don't get the pleasure of killing them. What kind of friends do you have there, Taiwan? You got to ask yourself. But at any rate, so my point is this. The U.S., neocons, continue to adjust their plan for world domination. But it's always a plan for world domination. It is, we hate the Russians and Chinese because they're communists. Okay, the Russians aren't communists anymore. Okay, well, now we hate them because, can we say we want to steal their stuff? No! Oh, okay. Then we hate them because they're dictators and they hate democracy and stuff like that. So here's what that meant. A couple of things. That realistically, the easiest thing you can do is Russia may fight with China, so you got to weaken Russia, but also, wouldn't it be even easier if you could get a compliant puppet government into Russia? You could then seize all of Russia's natural resources, which China is using, and you could shut down China without even a war. You could call China and say, oh, guess what, China? We're in charge of Russia now, and which means that the new OPEC plus that Russia and Saudi Arabia kind of are the big players in, yeah, we now run OPEC plus. So now you go to the Middle East, you say to Saudi Arabia and all of those, guess what? We run OPEC plus now. So we're going to control the price of oil, of energy worldwide. Oh, by the way, we decide who you sell to. When we say you can't sell to China anymore, you can't sell to, you don't even have to go to war with China. You go to China and you say, China, you got one of two options. You do everything we tell you to do. You become a neoliberal outpost, or else we'll just shut off your oil spigot, all your natural resources, and you're done. Oh, by the way, Africa, same for you. We control all the wheat because Russia has the wheat. We control everything. So you take Russia out, you don't necessarily have to go to war with China. But the first thing you got to do is take Russia out. So what do? You set up Ukraine as a cat's paw to use against Russia. You use Ukraine against Russia, Russia falls, and boom, you're there. There was one problem. There was one hitch in their get along, and that was they set up Ukraine to take out Russia. They were going to use economic sanctions, but because they had already sent their message clear as to what they were going to do, and because Russia has a history of being attacked by Western imperialism, Western madmen, Western neocons, whatever you used to call them, the ruling elite in the West, Russia was hip to it, and they set themselves up and got planned. And planned for it. And so when they made their move on Russia in 2014, Russia was already in the starting gate. And when they made their move on Russia in 2022, Russia says, all right, we know what the game is. We're going to start by knocking you out of Ukraine. And so they were like, okay, well, fair enough. That didn't work out. Everything didn't work out. So now we're kind of caught. Well, I know what we'll do. We've got this gigantic proxy army. We'll use that to fight out, to battle it out with Russia. That'll surely weaken Russia. And with this war, we'll make Putin unpopular. And then, voila, we're going to take out Putin. He'll fall. Well, none of that worked. None of that worked. Because the Russian people, they come on, let's face it, the king of Sweden and Hitler and, one after the other. Every time you turn around, somebody from the West is trying to take Russia. They're hip to it. Wasn't working anymore. So now we are at a place that is inevitable. And where are we? The U.S. is decision time. You are in a war with Russia, a proxy war that you are losing. You were always going to lose it. You were never going to win it, but you just didn't know. So here's where you are. You're still up to your ears in debt that you can't pay. You want to go to war with China so you can wreck the world economy. Do I have to get back to this? Because you're up to your ears in debt and you can't survive under the current economic system. You built an economic system, but your greed and your need to dominate have created a dynamic where the economic system and infrastructure that you created is now in collapse. So you need this big war so you can destroy the world's economic system, which would cause hundreds of millions, if not billions of people to starve, which you're all good for that. Yeah, because let's face it, they want to reduce the population anyway. So they want to shut down China's economy, starve probably billions, reduce the world's population, and regain, now we've got TSMC. We're the only place that can build chips because we've blown up TSMC. We build them in Arizona. We start over again, kind of like World War II. And here's the beauty of it. In World War II, at the end of World War II, why was the U.S., why were they so happy? Why? Europe was flat. Middle East, had been lots of wars blown up there, right? You had all of the Rommel and all that stuff going on. You had Asia, where Japan had been on the rampage, so all things were blown to hell. China had been attacked, and China had their war, internal civil war after that. All these things were going on. You were the only person left standing because you were so far away. So what you want to do now is you want to recreate that dynamic. You draw hopefully Europe into total and complete poverty and destitution, and they're in deep and serious trouble. And what the hell, if they happen to get in a war with Russia and get blown to shit, then all the better, because now you've got the same dynamic that you had at the end of World War II. Europe is no longer an economic threat, and you got to do another Marshall Plan where you provide, a little bit of pork fat and a box with some rice and sugar once a week to the European families so they can starve, so they can just barely survive and starve. You get them back to their freaking knees because you dragged them into a war with Russia, or total poverty because you cut them off from Russian natural resources. They're freezing to death, so you get to decrease the population of Europe significantly. What's not to like? You got good things going on, right? Everything's great, working out the way you wanted. The problem is other people have volition, and other people are pretty smart and wise, and they can figure it out. And so the Chinese clearly figured it out. The Russian figured it out. The Global South, they're all want to join BRICS, etc. They're figuring it out. And here's the problem that they have that gets us to a big jam for the U.S. empire and the neocons. There is one group that they can't afford to figure it out, and that's their own citizens, because they can't do it with their own citizens. If you're going to look at Ukraine, what do you need? Cannon fodder. And now they're dominating the cannon fodder. They got to throw cannon fodder in front of the cannons. The the American people are their job, and the Europeans is to be both economic, excuse me, not both, but economic, cultural, and military cannon fodder. Look at the Europeans starving up there right now. They're setting them up to starve and freeze, and there'll be economic cannon fodder. And maybe even a nice little war with Russia, then there'll be military cannon fodder. Then you have the war with China, and you show the American people, oh, the communist evil Red China has attacked us. As you attack them, you say they've attacked us, and you say to the American people, time to go to war. And then you bring in all a couple of young generations. Look, it was inevitable. Have you read all this stuff about the aging of the population? So you got all of these old people right here in the U.S. Well, you can deal with this two ways. Number one, I mean, you got two great things going on here. You start this war with China. You put all of these young Americans, generations of them. You do the same thing you're doing in Ukraine. You put generations of young Americans on ships. You're going over to the Middle East to fight the Chinese. And what is the Chinese? And it probably, they had a plan with the Russians probably involved. But what are the Chinese going to do? They're going to use subs and missiles to sink the damn ships. So you're going to have ships, probably passenger liners and everything, hundreds of thousands of young Americans, generation of young Americans heading 7,000 miles across the ocean to fight China. They'll never get there alive. Most of them will be blown to hell and sunk by submarines and missiles long before they come on. They'll be in missile range when they're a couple thousand miles from China. Right? As soon as they leave there'll be submarine missile ranges, and that's going to happen. But don't think they're upset about that. They need to get rid of these people. And what do you have now? You got a bunch of old people left here, but a lot of them are just going to die off. They're going to starve. They're going to freeze. You've destroyed the economy. So you get to wipe out a significant number of people in your population, but of the world's population, because you've destroyed the world economy. Everything's great. The neocons are saying we need to get rid of population. So guess what? Everything's working out fine. Now, they have miscalculated in that there would certainly be a nuclear war and they would all die. But they didn't think about that. And to some extent, they may be willing to take that chance. Look, what the hell? Rather than lose power, we'd rather die. So there's certainly that issue. But the issue here is this. All of this was inevitable. This clash was inevitable because the neocons wanted to maintain power, control the world, and the only way to do that is to suppress the growth of the rest of the world so that you can be the biggest dog on the block. And now their big problem the last big problem that you got to talk about is the people in America and the people in Europe. That's their big problem, because they can't accomplish all of that if the people say no. So now what do you have? That's what's going on with look at what's happening in Germany. The people are trying to push back, and now they're like, hey, maybe we'll just outlaw any party that the people want to go to that says that goes against what we want. Right? You've got the UK. What have they done? Well, the UK is easy. They just have one party and they named it too. Well, we've got the Labour versus the Tories, right? And ultimately, what do you get? Well, if you vote for Labour, you get the Tories. If you vote for Tories, you get the Labour. It doesn't matter. UK's done. That's done. They're impoverishing the people, and the people if they don't get torches and pitchforks in UK, who cares? They're done as far as they're concerned. If you guys don't kill us with pitchforks from the ruling elite, if you don't use your pitchforks, bring out your pitchforks and your torches and kill us, you can scream and cry all you want to. Nah, we ain't worried about it. All that we got to do is we're going to do massive amounts of censorship to shut the mouths of those who are pointing to the ruling elite saying, hey, those people are screwing us. We'll shut their mouths. Right? France, what happens? The people vote for Macron as best they can. Hey, we want somebody else. Macron says, oh, really? You do? Yeah, fair enough. You ain't getting it. That's what's happening in Europe. And in the US, you got Kamala Harris, who is just an effigy. An effigy. She's an avatar. They mock us. When they stick Biden and Harris out, these empty-headed dolts, it's their way of mocking us. It's their way of laughing at us. It's their way of saying, come on, look what we're sticking out there. What are you going to do? Resistance is futile. Meanwhile, Trump, who I ain't saying Trump is the second coming of, FDR or whatever, that he's a revolutionary figure by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not one of their people completely. And he may try. Let me explain. Well, forget what Trump will do. He may give some people hope. And there could be a conversation that arises as a result of Trump winning that makes them uncomfortable. And he may not be as down with censorship. So I'm not saying that Trump is some great revolutionary leader. I'm just saying simple. The ruling elite would prefer, they want Harris. They see him as a threat. Whether we see him as a threat or not is irrelevant. The ruling elite see him as a threat. And so therefore, every time you turn around, some Ukrainian recruiter is going to be laying out on a golf course trying to take a swipe at Trump, or perhaps a young guy who 22 years old, very oddly has no social media presence. He'll be laying on a roof somewhere pointing a frigging gun at Trump. That's kind of seems to me, perhaps, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little carried away here, but it seems to me that perhaps they want to do Trump a bad turn. And again, I ain't saying this is not pro or negative Trump. It has, I'll put it to you like this. You're fooling yourself if you think the issue of Trump has anything to do with how you see Trump, what you think about Trump, how bad or good you think Trump is. That's irrelevant. This is not a democracy. You don't get a vote. You don't get a say. Forget how you feel with Trump. The ruling elite see him as a problem because they think he may not go along with everything they want. Simple as that. So they're trying to ice him. And at this point, it's getting fairly obvious. And people are like, hey, I think they're trying to ice Trump. And the ruling elite's like, duh. Well, yeah, we're not trying to hide it. And then people are like, but he's a Zionist and he's doing everything you want. And they're like, well, not quite everything. And that'll get you killed. Right? Well, but he's doing like almost everything you want. And the key is almost. He may do something we don't want, and that'll get you killed. By the way, we're sick and tired of this illusion of democracy anymore. Time to end that, number one. But now what's obvious to me is their biggest fear, which is that we're getting wise to them. Their biggest fear is we're understanding what's going on, and we may just say, nah, and we may start voting for people they don't want. And how do they continue the illusion of democracy? How do they continue to argue we're standing for democracy worldwide when they're suppressing it at home and it's getting obvious and the people are getting restive saying, hey, cut it out. We want to vote in we want to vote in Garland Nixon. And they're like, you can't do that. And eventually the people are like, well, it's getting a little obvious this isn't a democracy. And now the people start pushing back. And now you're at war with the global South. You're at war with Russia. You're at war with China. You're at war with everybody. And the worst part of it is you're at war with the people at home. The biggest fear of the ruling elite are the guillotines. The biggest fear of the ruling elite is that we stop cooperating. That's their big fear, that we say no, that we say, I will not comply, right? Their biggest fear. They can't do their dirty work if the people here wake up and say, no, we ain't going along, we ain't down with this. Remember, we're the cannon fodder, we're the economic cannon fodder, and we're the military cannon fodder. And when they say, we're starting a war, give us your sons and daughters this time, and we say, we ain't doing it, they're screwed. How do they deal with that? How they deal with that now is they do all kinds of chicanery. They arrest us when we come to an airport. They hack into everything. And now they send us a clear message. Your phones, your pagers, anytime we want. Now, I'm not going to say that the phone pager scandal, that there was not explosives put in the pager. Maybe there were, I don't know, I guess there were. But one thing I know, I used to have a Galaxy Note 7. You know what problem they had with Galaxy? Because I had Galaxy Notes. I loved those big screens and all that for a while, and they had the pencils with them and all. Okay, even now I got a big old phone, one of these big they now call it something else, the S20 something Galaxy Ultra. I like the big screens with the pin and stuff like that. Okay. But the Galaxy 7 was an exploder. You remember that? Look at this. GALAY 7. Let's go here. Remember this? Samsung finally explains the Galaxy Note 7 exploding battery mess, right? Okay. The company said at a news conference Monday morning in South Korea that two separate problems with its lithium-ion batteries was to blame for fires, which led to unprecedented recalls.
At KPMG,
so it says that during the aftermath, the company worked to replicate the incidents and complete a detailed analysis, right? In the case of the first battery, Samsung pointed to a design flaw in the upper right corner that in some cases caused the positive and negative tabs to break down, resulting in a short circuit. Second battery, which was apparently faulty because of a welding defect that caused the apparent faulty, blah, blah, blah. So here's the bottom line. Notwithstanding any devious acts done by the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence community, you had an issue with phones exploding and catching on fire and burn before that, right? So my point is, I think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe people could argue against this, that if cell phone batteries already exploded and burned because of particular issues, that it is even quite possible that maybe all cell phones and pagers and electronic devices could be susceptible to that kind of stuff. If I send something and it sends a million signals to this phone, could it overheat it and it blow up? So I think one of the messages we're seeing from the Israeli PagerGate is that all of us are vulnerable. Look, you're in an electric car. I actually thought about buying an electric car one time, and now I'm like, yeah, you're sitting on a big battery. Could they possibly overheat that battery and blow me to hell? Now, it could just be conjecture, and it could very well be that they can't blow us up with phones and things like that. But I'll put it like this. It's not unreasonable to ask the question. It's not unreasonable to be suspicious. I mean, look at the history, like the infamous Tuskegee experiment, where the U.S. literally injected poor Black subsistence farmers in like Alabama with syphilis just to see how it spread throughout the community. Now, do you think it was only the Black community? I'm sure it spread to the white, spread all over the place. So what did they do? They stuck syphilis into their citizens just to see how it spread throughout the citizens. It was like a Nazi Joseph Mengele experiment on the American people. So if you look at the history of the things that they've done, the MK Ultra experiments, all these other things that they've done on citizens without their permission, is it Operation Northwoods? Look up that. They wanted to bomb American cities. They talked about taking planes, painting them like a Soviet plane, and then using it to bomb American cities, to have terrorist attacks against American terrorist attack operations in the U.S. to kill Americans so they could blame it on Cuba or blame it on the Soviets. They got no qualms about killing us. They ain't our friends. So that means it's not unreasonable to suspect that they may be up to no good with the phones, and that if they could use that as a weapon against the American people or any particular American people that they didn't like, they do it, or they could. It's not crazy to ask those questions. So bottom line is, that's the reason for a crackdown and a censorship on alternative media and on American people who question the foreign policy or any policies of the U.S. empire, because Their fear right now, it is inevitable that we would get where we are with their attempt to dominate the world. And it is also inevitable that their biggest fear would be an uprising from an American people, because that's the one place that can thwart all of their devious plans. Thanks a lot, everybody. I got to run. Garland is crazy for asking questions. I'm crazy even when I don't ask questions. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I don't have time for anything else right now. I got to run, get ready to get on a train. I'll go to DC, but don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms. You see everything scrolling across the bottom: Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, all that stuff. Follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Telegram. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me for as long as I'm there. Follow Patreon, if you can afford to help out on Patreon or PayPal, any of that stuff, certainly appreciated. Buy Me a Coffee is always great. It'll just say like, buy Garland a coffee. How much? $5. And it's like Patreon now. If you don't want to use Patreon, you can do Buy Me a Coffee for a monthly whatever amount you want. All right. I got to run. Share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. I'm out.